everyone, and welcome. Today, we're here to discuss a topic that our good friend JC calls Islamology. And of course, he is coming to us from the Bitcoin salt mines in Guadalajara, Chihuahua, Mexico. And of course, I'm joined by my good friend, Odon Lafontaine. And also, if you do like what we do on the channel, please do like, do share, do subscribe, do share it with Muslims. It does annoy them. And of course, if you'd like to support the channel, I would appreciate it because just like with Usama Daktok, I have to pay Odon not to sing every time he comes on. So this does cost. So if you'd like to support the channel and help us keep Odon from singing and saving yourselves from trauma, please consider supporting the channel. And Odon, thank you. And also Paul Ellis, welcome everyone.
Yeah, it's good to be here again. Thank you for having me, Lloyd.
You're very welcome. So as you guys know, it's Give an Old Joke a Home week, and I'm going to be sharing jokes that you guys can give a home to. And although most of you accuse me of having dad jokes, but the topics are serious. So, and welcome, Paul. How are you doing? Oh, Paul disappeared there for a second. That's okay. So tell you what, I'm just going to dive in. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. So I'm just going to recap the first series, the first episode, so that Odon can catch up. And of course, we'd love to have his input on this because we're building up towards the Elchasai and pulling in various strands as I typically do. So this is an article, almuslich.org, and we discussed this previously. And he is actually familiar with one of the writers that he's quoted here, this Leila Qadr. And of course, there were a large number of religious groupings in the first centuries. They formed a mosaic of different beliefs: Christian Jews, Nazarenes, Nazarene Jews, and Christianized Jews. And of course, Muhammad drew upon a wide variety of religious traditions in the region, everything from paganism that had settled there in the past that was remembered by the culture. So you had Nabonidus, you had the Manichaeans, you had the Babylonian ideas, the Yemeni ideas. And researchers have come to conclude that there was a purely Jewish-Christian alliance that was very close to the alliance of the Ebionite or Elchasite communities, which is really interesting. That it starts off with a potentially heretical Christian view, as well as this early Gnostic, very Jewish Gnostic apocalyptic group. Any thoughts, Odon, before we continue?
Yeah, not only were they Gnostic, but they were also Messianists.
Yes.
They had all angles covered.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is that, of course, he received a book from an angel, which may be a familiar story. Now, Leila Qadr writes The Three Faces of the Quran from 2014. It's in French. And the book collected together fragments from the Bible, biblical apocrypha, Jewish midrash, and contemporary legends. And every tale related in the Quran finds its source in pre-existing texts. We've been covering that the last couple of weeks on the channel, going through the sources of every tale in the Quran. In fact, I had an episode on that last night. Now, they speak of Himyarite and Aksumite. Himyar is, think, Yemen, and of course, Aksumite, this would be Ethiopia. And these are areas where discoveries have been made. It's archaeological discoveries, inscriptions that modify the chronology of some of the borrowings of Islam. And it has been discovered that terms no less important than words like Salah and Zakah were already used in Himyarite. Now remember, these are people who followed the Babylonian religion more than 200 years before Islam. And they spoke South Arabic, which is not the Arabic we know today, but think of it as an early ancestor in one sense. But these people were using these terms in their pagan religion long before Islam was even created. And the Quran's borrowings from pre-existing texts from which Quranic themes such as let's just say the whorehouse paradise, penal punishments, Ramadan, saving Abram from fire by the angel Gabriel, and so on, have all been drawn. So any comments, anyone, before we continue? And welcome back, Paul.
Yeah, I know Leila Qadr very, very well. She's a friend. And I've got her books, The Three Faces of the Quran. And I can say, because it's now public knowledge, that her real name is Florence Chaussy. And she wrote articles and published that were published by Inara, the Inara Institute. So she's a sort of she's a scholar, but she's a PhD student, but she's my age or a bit older.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a book.
All right, so it's great that you know her. Pity she speaks only French. So we've covered on the channel the last couple of weeks that numerous, not just the stories in the Quran, but numerous practices, religious practices, are borrowed from multiple different religious groupings, from Jewish, Christian, heretical Christian, Gnostic, pagan, and so on. You can find these things directly within those religious groupings, some of them going back 2,000-3,000 years before Muhammad.
Yeah.
Right.
If I can add something at this point, we tend to think of all these groups as being very distinct, very with very different identities. And Lloyd, you talk about borrowings, for example, as if it wasn't a sort of a common culture. You see, I think in this time, in the late antiquity in the Middle East, all these Jewish-like groups who recognize Jesus as the Messiah, for example, or who were opposed to rabbinic Jews, they had a lot of things in common. But the thing is, we know them through the descriptions of some of the fathers of the church or some ancient historian who wrote books about heresies and sects and current, and they this type of book underlines the differences. It's a sort of genre, of a literature genre. You have to make collections of different heresies, and so the groups have to be depicted as being very different from one another, with having different names and so on. Whereas I think there was they shared many things. Yeah, and for example, when we look at all the Gnostic groups, we tend to see them as different.
Well, they had multiple themes. All of them. There's at least 8 categories where they're all pretty much the same.
Yeah.
You know. Now, I've covered them extensively in the past, and you're right. There's lots of overlap. They tend to borrow the same ideas and then try to put their own spin on them. But yeah, they're not as different as one might think. Yeah, interestingly, the church fathers considered the Ebionites to be heretical Jews, and there's disagreement as to whether the Ebionites and Nazarenes are 2 different sects, or if they constitute a single sect, as is believed.
That's exactly my point.
Fathers. Yeah, interestingly. And of course, the Nazarenes were in Jerusalem, and they added the name Ebionites after they had migrated to other regions. Yeah, according to this, at least. Now, I just want to mention again the Elchasites to remind you all. According to early Christian and Manichaean sources, Manichaean is from Mani, one of the very early Gnostics. Elchasai was the founder of the sect of the Elchasites, and he received the book of Revelation, the book of Elchasai, and he's said to be the belief of the parents of Mani. And according to Epiphanius in Panarion, the name Elchasai means the hidden power, and in Aramaic, it's the Hail Kasai. And Eusebius, in his ecclesiastical history from the mid-3rd century, notes the following. And these guys are in the Arabian Peninsula, by the way. Once more in Arabia, other persons sprang up, introducing a doctrine foreign to the truth, saying that human soul dies for a while in this present time, along with our bodies at their death, and with them turns to corruption, but that hereafter, at the time of the resurrection, it will come to life again along with them. There's just come now a certain man who prides himself on being able to champion a godless and impious opinion of the Elchasites, as it is called. It rejects some of the things from every scripture. And again, it has made use of texts from every part of the Old Testament and the Gospels. Sounds a lot like Islam and Muhammad. And it says to deny is a matter of indifference. So in other words, it's takia. You can deny that you belong to the sect as long as you maintain faith in your heart. Your lips can utter the lie that you don't belong to the group. So a man will on occasion of necessity deny his religion with his mouth, but not in his heart. And they produce a book which they say has fallen from heaven. And the book condemned virginity. And it also permitted the worship of cult images to escape persecution, provided the act was merely external, and prayer was made towards Jerusalem. Odd, very odd overlap with Islam there.
Yeah, exactly. And there's an elephant in the room here. When you're talking about overlap with Islam, it's the word Nazarene, because we have the word Nazarene 14 times in the Quran. But the real question here is what does Nazarene means within the context of the Quran?
Correct. Okay, so I'll skip that. So I'll just rush forward because I want to get through to that. So I spoke then of Judith Romney Wagner's, I did a small snippet of her article, Islamic and Talmudic Jurisprudence, where she speaks of the overlap between Islamic law, the Sharia, and what they borrowed from Jewish law, what they misapplied or misunderstood from Jewish law, and the words that they borrowed, like the word Hajj and Hag and so on, right? And multiple things. So there are many similarities between Quranic and Midrashic and biblical sources, but the differences indicate the Prophet Muhammad did not have direct knowledge. He seemed to have had secondhand knowledge, or he had, shall we say, a misinterpretation of them by people who didn't seem to know what they're speaking of. Okay? And so on. I won't go into all of that, but there's a number of different overlaps, right? There's a number of different overlaps. Arabic Hajj, Hebrew Hag, and so on and so on. And of course, relationships to Christian Syriac, lots of borrowings, and the real 5 pillars of Islam. I covered that as well. So now let's continue. So early impressions. So T.W. Arnold. These are people who were in that region proselytizing. These are missionaries who went out. Islam is born in the desert with Arab Sabaeanism for its mother, Judaism for its father, and its foster nurse was Eastern Christianity. So T.W. Arnold. And then, of course, Samuel Zwemer said, Islam is not an invention, but a concoction. There is nothing new about it, except the genius of Muhammad in mixing old ingredients in a new medicine for human ills and forcing it down by means of the sword. Odon, your thoughts, and JC?
Yeah, they are, in my opinion, kind of right, but for the fact that they are completely abiding by the Islamic narrative with this idea that Muhammad created Islam, or that he was at the origins. He was the main the main contributor to Islam. And when you really look into this idea, it makes no sense at all. No one ever created a religion. Muhammad did not create Islam. He did not wake up one morning and he thought, yeah, let's create Islam. No one does this. Muhammad is, there were historical Muhammads, of course, but they did not create a new religion. They were part of the concoction. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, the religion was created when the Islamic tradition was written. So it's not about Muhammad mixing old ingredients, Muhammad having been taught by rabbis or by anyone. It's about religious currents mixing together, making this sort of concoction. And in the end, with the fabrication of the Islamic narrative, it became Islam.
Right. We've actually got a Muslim here saying he's 22. He's naturally attracted to younger girls. The Kinsey scale, a Western study done in the 1960s, proved that male attraction can exist on a broad spectrum. In other words, you're a pedophile. So, so anyway, let's move on. Let's just leave that for now. Okay, so let's continue. Now, the Sabaeans, a Muslim perspective. So I want to try and go quickly through this so I don't repeat too much. The Muslim writer Muhammad Shukri al-Alusi, who was born in 1802, spoke of the religious practices that, now he's not the only Muslim scholar. I discussed a different one yesterday with Usama, who said the same things, that Muhammad and the Sabians, their religions are actually, he borrowed, they're like a 90% overlap between the old pagan, moon-worshipping Sabians and Muhammad's religion. He says in the Bulugh Arab fi Ahwal al-Arab, Arabs during the pre-Islamic period practiced the things that were included in the Islamic Sharia, and they made the major Hajj and the minor Umrah pilgrimage to the Kaaba, performed circumambulation around the Kaaba. They ran between Mount Safa and Marwa. They threw rocks and washed themselves after sexual intercourse. They goggled, sniffed water up their noses, clipped their fingernails, removed pubic hair, ritual circumcision. They cut off the right hand of a thief and stoned adulterers. They had 5 prayers a day as well, and 2 optional prayers, just like Islam, right? They fast for a lunar month of 30 days at the same times as the Muslims do. They also faced the Kaaba when they prayed. They venerated Mecca and believed in making pilgrimage to it. And remember, these are people that were around 1,000 years before Muhammad, right?
No, it is such a fantasy. There's nothing true in these writings. The Kaaba, there was no devotion to a Kaaba with 7 circumambulation and so on. This is all a description of what happens in Jerusalem at the temple.
Yeah. Now, I just want to mention this person is defending pedophilia, which is disgusting, because they will condemn Jeffrey Epstein for raping 14-year-olds, but they won't condemn Muhammad for raping a 9-year-old. And he's saying here during Muhammad's time, nobody saw anything wrong with his marriage because Arabs, well, I mean, what does that say about the Arabs from that day and age? It says something very ugly about them. It was only until more recent times that people started seeing it as wrong. And so you see, they will condemn Jeffrey Epstein, but they won't condemn Muhammad because, so look, you don't want these Arabs in your country. You don't want these Muslims in your country because you can see someone here is blatantly defending pedophilia. Rest my case. Paul, welcome back. Hopefully your connection is stable now. How are you doing?
Hi, sorry about that. I've had 1 or 2 technical difficulties my end. Just joining you now.
Great, good to have you. Yeah, good to have you.
It'll take me a moment to catch up with where you are.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Take your time. If you want to maybe just watch the, on half double speed or something, just watch the last few minutes. But yeah, we're speaking of these Sabaeans, the Sabians as well. There's a little bit of confusion in the Quran between them. It tends to lean towards the Sabians, but there's also an overlap with the Sabaeans. That's the Yemenis, who worshipped effectively the Babylonian religion, and the Sabians, who were, shall we say, somewhere between Gnostic worshippers, as well as they worshipped the stars, the sun and the moon. So they were, Babylonian, Egyptian mystery religion, Babylonian astrological Gnostics. So something, and of course, there is a story. There's actually a story where Muhammad, I've covered this before, but of course, a woman is taken to Muhammad and she says, oh, the man who started the new religion, the Sabi. So Muhammad is explicitly called a Sabian, right? These are the people in Haran in Turkey, which is where Abraham was before he became the father of the patriarch of the Jews, right? Before he followed Yahweh. But in fact, there's a case where people convert to Islam and they celebrate by calling themselves Sabians.
Yeah, I'll say that of all this series, Lloyd, that you are doing, it's looking more and more like Lloyd looks for something, anything that is unique to Islam, because you just keep going, this thing, okay, they copied from here, this from there. So far, we're searching for something that they actually created. Everything seems to be copied so far. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
but we just found it, thanks to our Muslim friend in the comments. Pedophilia.
Yeah, it's disgusting. I mean, it's disgusting. It's just, look, I mean, I'm done with Islam, and I think a lot of people are, and I have no, look, I mean, seriously, it's too filthy for me to entertain and get into discussions, and for someone trying to normalize it, because please understand this, once they normalize it, they're going to do it to your kids.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'm not having that. I am absolutely, positively not having that.
Yeah, I have a friend who was a former convert to Islam. He spent 20 years in Islam, and one of the things that made him quit Islam is when he used to live in Medina in Saudi Arabia, and some guys asked him for his daughters. They were under 10 at the time. And he was so shocked that he remained a Muslim for a time, but it worked within him. Because he wasn't a cultural Muslim.
Yeah, no,
he was a convert from Belgium.
Yeah, well,
so he still had it in him that that pedophilia was something really, really wrong.
Yeah, no, I mean, let's just call it what it is. It is disturbing, and Islam needs to be destroyed. It needs to be removed from Europe. It needs to be sent back wherever it came from. I think it's that
shock,
simple.
actually. And culture shock. And now I see more and more people trying to rewrite 1400 years of Islamic history and saying that these things are not there, they're not in the hadiths. Everything has been misinterpreted. I mean, things that are even in Sharia, but now in the 21st century, they have to, yes, rewrite everything. But we're not going to let them. But anyway, on these topics, Lloyd, maybe you have this somewhere, but have you seen any culture that actually hated dogs, just like Islam? Yes, because maybe that is the one thing that is unique to Islam.
No idea, but I mean, but the Muslims allowed dogs in the Hadith to enter the mosques and urinate in the mosques. So did they really? I mean, you just find these bizarre contradictions and juxtapositions.
Yeah, and Muhammad had one dog in his house as well. Even though he has the knowledge of God, he should have known the word haram. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, yeah, I don't know. We could always, somebody please check on ChatGPT. Don't ask about Islam. Don't have it start being apologetical. Just ask it, is there a culture that was known to hate dogs? Any culture from, a couple of thousand years ago that hated dogs, Okay, so Muhammad the Sabi. It was said about the Sabians of Haran that they used to make a yearly pilgrimage to the pyramids of Egypt. Maimonides, that's the Jewish sage, says that the Sabians are remnants of the ancient Egyptian priests who practiced hieroglyphic magic, a system of language encoding that can engineer consciousness. And of course, this now takes us to the word ahruf. Now, I'm not going to go into depth, but yes, it's letter of the alphabet, a word, a Quranic reading, a dialect. But scholars say they struggle to tell you what an ahruf really is. Well, of course, if you look at the Encyclopedia of Islam, the science of the ahruf is onomatomancy, a magical practice based on the occult properties of the letters of the alphabet and the divine and angelic names which they form, which is very much like the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic magic system, just so by the way. So, continuing, Thoth of ancient Egypt was a moon deity, though they had other deities who also served as moon deities, and Thoth is also known as Hermes Trismegistus, the father of Gnosticism. Yes, father of Hermeticism, but Gnosticism spread out from Hermeticism, and of course they have overlaps as well as differences. And this is the hadith in question. She asked where, they said to Allah's messenger. She said, do you mean the man who is called the Sabi, the Sabian, with a new religion? And they said, yes, the same person. So come along. And they took her to the Prophet Muhammad. So according to the hadith, he was a Sabian. And the word Saba means the one who has deserted his old religion and embraced a new religion. And Abu Ilyas said, the Sabis are a sect of people of the scripture who recite the book of Psalms. Now, Gnostics, who are known to have used the book of Psalms, include the Manichaeans, the Sethians, the Valentinians, the Nazarenes, the Hermeticists. And so I'm not going to go into great depth. Thoth is respected in Islam, oddly enough, as Idris, the second prophet mentioned in the Quran. And of course, we know that he is the pagan god, the Egyptian god, who brought the hikmah. He's also known as Mercury in the Roman pantheon. So any thoughts from you guys before I continue? Your thoughts, perhaps, Paul, starting with you.
Still catching up with this a little bit. I'll take a pause on this for the time being, and
Okay.
I don't. It's not really my area of expertise. It's fascinating.
How does it strike you?
I'm a little out of my depth at the moment.
As someone who's not, I mean, you're an intelligent guy, very educated on the topic of Islam. How does this information strike you?
I'm not sure. The connection with Egypt is always very interesting. It's often overlooked when one talks about the geography of the Quran. One tends to think of whether the Muslims, of course, talk about the Arabian Peninsula, the Hijaz, and we tend to think it's all happening a lot further north. We tend to think in terms of, I talk about Jerusalem a lot, but there's also a strong Mesopotamian and Persian influence. Egypt often gets kind of overlooked. So I find that all very interesting. Pharaoh is extraordinarily prominent in the Quran, isn't he? He's mentioned, I think, 74 times, which is a huge number, far more than, for example, Jesus. I think he's probably second only to Moses. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. It should be noted the Sabians had a very large temple, a magical temple, which was dedicated to the star, the moon god and the star god, their astrological pantheon in Haran. And when the Muslims got there, they took it over. They turned it into a mosque, but they also kept it it was like University of Magic. It was run by Nabonidus's daughter, I believe. She was the high priest at the time. They took it over, and what happened, originally. And anyway, so the Muslims took the space over. And they, according to the Sufis, they took all of the magical books, the magical documents to Spain with them.
I mean, I suppose I would mention that the Quran talks at one point about the different, the 3 points. It mentions lists of confessional groups, I guess you'd call it, and it talks about the believers, by which it seems to refer to the people who believe in Muhammad and the Quranic movement. But it also talks about other groups, and the Sabians are mentioned in that. So wouldn't that seem to suggest that the authors of the Quran, or at least those passages, saw the Sabians as somebody different to the believers?
They saw them as different, but they also saw them as people of the book. So they saw them, they put them in the same category as Jews and Christians, which is very unusual because they were clearly Gnostics.
Depends, because as you pointed it here, we don't know actually what the Sabians were to the early believers and to the writers of the Quran. You see, a Sabi is a convert, for example, in the hadiths you showed.
True,
and
but
in the Quran, the Sabians, at least some of them, are to get to paradise. So they are good people also.
They are people of the book, but they're put in the same category as Christians, which they're not. But these look like heretics.
You see, I think that the reason why some scholars identified the Sabians within the Quran with the Mandeans, a Baptist group that may be connected to John the Baptist.
Yeah. Now we'll get to the Mandeans. Yeah, we'll come to that in time. So let's not get too deep into that. JC, any thoughts before I move on?
Well, basically, to clarify that as well, that yes, Sabi in here is the same root that is used for like baptism. So there could have been a connection that they saw this guy as Sabian or as a Mandean because of the connection. But based on everything that you've been showing, it does look like he was more of a Sabian because a lot of the things that the Sabians did have ended up in Islam. So maybe this meant a Mandean, but they still took a lot from the Sabians. So it seems to fit that they meant this specific group who did the voodoo and all of these things in the same manner. So
but also the Quran confuses between the Sabaeans, the Yemenis, and the Sabians, who are from Turkey, Syria. So there's some confusion. The Quran provides, this is from the Encyclopedia of the Quran, which is like 6,000 pages. It's in my Google archive. The Quran provides the Sabaeans with a religious status comparable to that of the Jews and Christians. Technically, there should be Sabians. The Sabaeans were the Yemenis, but fine. So
it's more than Jews. The Quran says those who Judaized, who became Jews.
All right. And these were heretical Jews. These were not Orthodox by any means. I mean, clearly. Now, Islam and Hermes.
There was no such thing as a Jewish Orthodoxy at the time, I think. Rabbinism was beginning to be the Orthodoxy, but there were many different ways of being Jewish.
Yeah, but there must have been something compliant, at least, with the tenets of Judaism, as opposed to something that was openly heretical, or can be classified as such.
The only rules or set of rules we have are those of the Rabbinism, Judaism. For example, we have the text of the Birkat Haminim. You know this, the benediction of the heretics.
Yeah.
The rabbinic Jews, or the future rabbinic Jews, composed it in the 2nd century to excommunicate, sort of, all Jews who were called minim, which mean heretics.
Yeah,
but especially those who recognize Jesus as the Messiah.
Yeah, but then the Muslims played on that because they were called heretics by the Jews as well. They were the Ha'manim, and then the Muslims became the Mu'minin. And they said, no, yes, we are, because is just a prefix meaning they who do the thing that is referred
because
to.
They
became the heretics, so they adopted it and said, no, but we are the right belief.
Yeah, because they recognize Jesus as the Messiah, which is the core thing of the Birkat Haminim.
Yep. Yep. So, but yeah, we'll get to that. So Thoth Hermes in Islam, the wisdom literature of Egyptian Hermeticism, became part of Islamic tradition, right? So somehow this pagan god, this pagan Egyptian god, becomes part of, and he's the Roman god Mercury. He's also the Greek god. I can't remember the name right now, but he's actually in the Greek and Roman pantheons. And so he's a sacred inheritance from the prophets, and Hermes himself now becomes the ancestor of the prophet Muhammad, supposedly. And in the version of the Hermetic text kept by the Ikhwan al-Safa, Hermes Trismegistus becomes the prophet Enoch, who was a Muslim, but who was an Egyptian pagan, oddly enough, also a Roman pagan god, also a Greek pagan god, but somehow he's a Muslim. And of course, he brings the black stone back to earth. And of course, the star-worshipping sect known as the Sabians of Haran also believed that their doctrine descended from Hermes Trismegistus. And this leaves us with Hermeticism and the occult. So now, of course, Hermes so Idris, according to the Encyclopedia of the Quran, is a corruption of the last 2 syllables of Poimandres, which is the book. You see, it's the tablet that Hermes Trismegistus happened to have. His book. It's called the Jade Tablet. So the Poimandres, Idris. So he had a book as well, oddly enough, and Muhammad had to have a book as well. You know, Gill suggested that Idris is a corruption of the name Hermes. That's the other one. Hermes, Mercury, and Hermes Trismegistus, a name that reached the Arabs in the form of Hermes.
Oh.
So now notice here, Hermes from the Encyclopedia of Islam, Hellenistic name of the Egyptian god Thoth, passed in both of his capacities into Islam, and they transformed the Muslims, the god, into one of the heroes of the olden times. He brought the Hikmah and Achnuch, Enoch, and Idris. So he has 3 manifestations, right? He comes back twice. And Haram is their name that being connected with his and other sanctuaries. Why? Because he is Egyptian, and of course the Haram is part of the Egyptian heritage, which they take. And the second, Idris, the second Hermes lived in Babylonia, and the third, of course, in Egypt after the flood. So there's this weird stuff that they take. Now, I'll move on quickly here, unless you guys want to say anything, because I've covered this before.
Yeah. I don't think it's that weird. Hermes in the Greek mythology, he is the messenger of the gods.
Yeah,
of Zeus and all the others. So it's sort of what the scholars would say. Would call it. They would call it a topoi, a common name. You see, it's a cultural thing. You are a messenger from the gods. You are a Hermes. So if you pretend to speak God's word, you are sort of Hermes.
Yeah. Well, they just pick and choose, and they redefine as they go.
Oh.
So then, I'm not going to go over this much, so I'm not going to go into the idea of Baal. But of course, the Quranic surahs named after, I've spoken previously of the Quranic surahs named after pagan deities like Yasin. Sin is the Babylonian moon god. And of course, Muslim scholars say that this is the heart of the Quran. That's Quran chapter 36. Okay. And you've got numbers like, Quran 54, Al-Qamar, the moon. Quran 55, Ar-Rahman, right? All of these, Al-Najm, the star, Al-Malik, known from Molek, Al-Buruj, At-Tariq, the morning star, Venus, and Sirius. Now, what's interesting is Allah also calls himself the Lord of Sirius, right? So Allah calls himself the Lord of Sirius. Now, what's interesting here is, and hopefully we catch up after this slide, Sirius was worshipped by Nabonidus. He was the king of Babylon. He settled in northern Arabia near what's called Yathrib. We call it Medina today, so not that far from Mecca. And he brought his religion with him, and he worshipped the moon god and so on. And notice Quran 53:49 in An-Najm, the star, and he alone is the Lord of Sirius. Allah is the Lord of Sirius. He's the main head of the pantheon, of which Sirius, the star, is a god. Sirius was worshipped by Nabonidus. Only once is a star mentioned in the Quran by its Arabic name, and that he's the Lord of Al-Shirra. Al-Shirra is the star Alpha Canis Majoris, or Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. And it was worshipped in the Jahiliyyah by Arab tribes before Islam. And it is stressed that Allah, creator of all, is the Lord of Sirius. Now, the moon god Shin, also known as Makkah, also known as Allah amongst the southern Arabs, was head of this pantheon of gods. Shin is the Lord of Sirius, and thus Shin is Allah. We also know, and we've covered, that Muhammad was consecrated to Hubal. Hubal is Baal, who was known as Allah in the Kaaba, this according to the Sirat Rasulullah. And Hu, the prefix, simply means he who is Baal, although Hu can also mean a con man or deceiver. So, and then Ibn Abbas tells us, and that he it is who is the Lord of Sirius, who was worshipped by the Kuzah, right? You can see it's here in the Quran. And who are the Kuzah? The Banu Kuzah are a Katanite tribe. This is a tribe from the north, this would be from north, this is from around, the Katanites should be from, they're mentioned in the Bible, if I recall, Joktan. These are from the people of Joktan. And one of the main ancestral tribes of the Arabian Peninsula, that's north of Mecca. And they ruled Mecca for a long period. They lived in Yemen, then moved north. They also worshipped the god Manat. They became the custodians of the sacred house, the Kaaba, for 500 years. And one of them brought an idol called Hubal to Mecca from Syria. And this is also mentioned very much in Muhammad's biography. I'll pause there. I'm trying to just catch us up so that we don't, but there, I'll pause there. Your thoughts, guys?
Well, actually, I don't know whether we can rely on all of this because it all comes from, mostly it comes from the Islamic tradition, who had to invent a Jahiliyyah, the polytheist past, the fake polytheist past before Islam.
True, so, they had to justify that he was the prophet talking to the pagans. But if you go into the actual archaeology and history of the region, these things were there, right? And you obviously have that they tried over time to become more Abrahamic, but then they also were claiming Abraham was a pagan, and that they were going back to his, the original religion of Abraham, which was this Sabaean religious mishmash, this pagan thing. And it's just that the stuff is so, if you go through the sources, there is so much reference where Islam is drawing from this constantly. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't stop. It's just constant references to this throughout the Islamic sources, and it ties in with actual history. So it's just that why they're so fascinated with this, because they're trying to be Abrahamic, they're trying to be Zoroastrian, they're trying to be Sabaean, they're trying to be this and that and everything all at the same time.
I don't know if you guys have had a chance to read Suleiman Dost's book, Before the Quran, which I think came out about maybe a month ago, maybe not even that, maybe about 3 weeks ago. But it's not a very long book, but it's very interesting. And he talks, he tries to reconstruct the religious views that the Quran is condemning, basically, or dealing with, and he kind of comes to the view that the paganism, old style paganism, had come to an end maybe 1.5, 2 centuries earlier. He says, I don't know quite how these people date these rock inscriptions if they don't have good dates on, but he seems to form the view. The experts who look at these inscriptions form the view that there are a whole load of pagan inscriptions around around Arabia, around the Hijaz, around other parts, and they all seem to kind of die out around about 100 years or so, around about 400, 500, significantly before anyone starts talking about the Quran. And Dost's theory, or one of his theories, is that some of the pagan practices survive. So, for example, when the Quran talks about cutting the ears of, that's it. When it talks about cutting the ears of cattle, or it talks about designating one part of the crops for the gods and one part for themselves. It suggests that these are pagan practices that have still lingered on long after people have actually stopped believing in the gods themselves. Yep. It's like, I suppose, a bit like Halloween or so Valentine's Day. People,
you're right.
People keep the traditions going long after.
If you read the stories and poetry of the tribes, they were violent, primitive people, and these ideas, the jinn and all these things were retained. They've never disappeared from the cultural mythology, the folklore, the beliefs of the people in the region.
Oh, the jinn are real. Yes, I've had some jinn with my computer this evening, so yes, they're definitely real.
No, Allah works in mysterious ways, as we've said. Yeah, JC, any thoughts from you? I've more or less.
I think that, that it would make sense that they lost the theology, but they kept the traditions, like basically culture, and they just kept doing those things. And then when the person we now call Muhammad comes around, they start trying to do basically Tawheed. They take everything that is around and they say this is the one true religion, but then you unpack it and they have all of these bits and pieces from all of the other places. That would make sense.
Right. Okay, so I think this is what we
Lloyd, just a last thing about Allah being the Lord of Sirius. There's, I think, another explanation for this. It doesn't mean that Allah is Sirius. It means that Allah is over everything.
Yes, he's the head of the pantheon of gods. Yeah, Sirius
is it's not a pantheon of God. No. It's not about an idea of a pantheon of God. It's that it's the same. I think it's kind of the same rhetoric as the one about the Qibla. You see, the passages about the Qibla, there is criticism about people turning their head to the east or to the west or to the heavens, and the Quran says that the east and the west belong to Allah. Allah is above everything.
Yeah.
So he is above Sirius. Sirius is nothing compared to Allah.
No, certainly one can say that. But if you go back just prior, as Paul was saying, just prior, there were these religions before they got displaced by what seems like Christianity, because people are finding now Christian sculptures, various crosses, symbols, and churches and monasteries in that region that were buried, that were destroyed and buried. But that would be a nice way to reinterpret the story, to spin it. Because if you go back just prior, then Allah was the Lord of Sirius, quite literally, because he was the head of the pantheon, you know. So under Muhammad, they could spin that and say, well, you see, what actually means this?
So, that's the ambiguity with the Allah word. There is a pagan origin to the word, but there is also a Christian origin to the word.
Yeah, but the pagan origin goes back before Christianity even.
Yeah, but the Christian etymology is not to be that easily rejected.
Yeah, but before Christianity even started, Allah was around. I mean, so Allah was known as the moon god Shin, for instance.
Yeah, but Allah also comes from the Aramaic Allah, Elohim.
Certainly, but then also, generally, I've had a couple of Christians on, including Usama, and they'll say typically the Christians use it in the sense of the God. That's the definite article, not as a proper name.
But Muslims that's the thing, among Christian apologists, they want to vilify Islam. And so they insist on Allah being a pagan god. Because they don't want to recognize that Arabs used to be Christians.
No, certainly. But even in the Sirah, you've got Allah being Hubal or Baal. I mean, so
Of course, because there, like I told you, there is an ambiguity, because Allah also comes. It also has a sort of pagan etymology or past.
But if you go to the Sabaeans who were in charge of that region, and you go to the Aksamites and so on, you'll find that Allah was a name used for Shin, the Babylonian moon god. And he had multiple names, and Hubal is one of them.
It is also the name of the Christian god and the Jewish god.
Yeah.
So you see the ambiguity here.
Yeah, but that also, the Muslims imposed the name Allah on the region, whereas before that, God has a name, right?
Yeah, God was called Allah in Aramaic.
So
and Elohim.
And certainly not in the same idea as Allah. I mean, that was Arabized later by imposition. So yeah, it's like using the word El, exactly. But yeah, so I finished here last time. So let me just run forward from here. So Ger Puin, the Sabians, the Manda, and the Gnosis. This is in Syrian and Arabian Christianity and the Quran. This is from the Hidden Origins of Islam. And he says that we will say more later about the theological influences on the communities of Syrian Christians. For approximately 300 years, there was a Hellenistic or Greek Christianity alongside Syrian Christianity. Indeed, Hellenistic influences are recognizable in the area as a whole for an even longer period. These Hellenistic influences and the Persian influences helped explain that even in the early Christian period. Gnostic movements were quite at home in the region of Syria. For example, Marcionism spread into Syria from the end of the 2nd century onward. And the Odes of Solomon and the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas appeared in Syria already in the 2nd century, as well as the Songs of the Pearl in the apocryphal Acts of Thomas, and most likely also the Gospel of Philip. All of these are apocryphal Gospels. They tend to be named after well-known people like apostles or very well-known figures in the Bible, because you don't want to call the Gospel of Jimmy because nobody knows who Jimmy is.
Yeah, so except for the Song of the Pearl. The Song of the Pearl is a genuine Christian writing.
Right. Yeah, okay. And further, both books of Jehu, in which Seth plays an important role, as well as Sethian Gnosticism and the related Barbelo Gnosticism transmitted in the Apocryphon of John, should be ascribed to this region. Also true of the Mandaeans from Manda, the Gnosis or knowledge, who appeared in southern Iraq and Iran, and of their literature. These Mandaeans use the name the Nazareans as a marker of self-identification, and they are called Sabians in the Quran. Manichaeanism appeared in the 3rd century in Persia and spread eastward towards Central Asia and as far as Northern Africa and Italy. So now you've got an entire soup of Gnostic/pagan religions. Islam doesn't stand alone. It's in the middle, and it didn't have an established religion like the religion of the book. So now it wants to join the club. Gnosticism was a phenomenon of syncretistic Hellenism. It was strongly influenced by Persian traditions, and that's important because one of the earliest, and this is a Gnostic tradition that started with a book received from an angel, and that's important, came out of Persia, and that's as we move towards the Elchasites. And of course, it devalued the material or the bodily, right? And the divine logos only took on the appearance of a body, and we get the very similar references we've covered in regards to the Islamic stories of the crucifixion of Jesus. And the dualism has a strongly anti-Jewish impulse amongst the Gnostic movements in East Syria. And of course, you have the Old Testament creation story against which Gnosticism basically fights. And also, if you read the Nicene Creed, I think, is it the Nicene Creed? We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen. We believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, only Son of God, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father. Every single line of that creed is a refutation of a form of Gnosticism. Every single line is specifically written to refute a given form of Gnosticism, or several of them. So there were conflicts with Christian Gnosis. It was most likely Syrian Christianity, in which the Old Testament was very developed, that called forth this polemic on the part of the Gnostic groups. So any thoughts from you guys on that so far? Because now you've got Arabia was a cauldron, a melting pot of multiple different heresies, Judaism, Christianity, different versions of Christianity, but also a massive amount of old pagan ideas plus heresies.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I suppose my first. Sorry.
Go
sorry,
for
just
it.
briefly. So after all of this, then we're going to get something like the Quran that has from apocryphal stories from the Jews, from the Christians. They're mentioning some pagans. They're having lots of these things that when you have unpacked them in this manner, it looks like yeah, it was a soup, and what it emerged out of that is what we now call Islam. It wasn't one guy saying, actually, God has told me that this is the truth. It looks like one guy or a group of guys saying, hey, let's take all of these things together and let's see if we can turn this into something new. And of course, here we are.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think if this is the religion of Abraham, right? If it's Abrahamic or Jewish, let's say, then you'd think you'd have a directly Jewish slant, and you'd get rid of these things and you'd identify them as non-biblical, let's say. But they persist within Islamic literature as legitimately Islamic, for that matter. It's just really strange. They accepted everything as opposed to rejecting things on hard lines. They say they reject paganism, but you'll find this paganism stamped all over Islam. Paul, you were going to say?
Yeah, I mean, you can see how the subject matter of the Bible and religion, the Quran, religion in general, lends itself to people who want to overcomplicate things and create new little stories and then follow the stories. And you can see how secret wisdoms and sects can grow up. I'm not sure that's how I read the Quran itself. There's not that much in the Quran that I could associate with promoting a non-monotheistic view. You find odd references to that.
I did it again. I didn't close the bottle lid in time, and oh my god, it fizzed all over the desk. The desk is wet. Good grief. Yeah,
it's a gin. I tell you, they're real. A genie.
I 100% have to agree with you. This has happened to me so many times while I'm streaming. Please go on, Paul.
No, just to say that there are some very slight traces in the Quran of this pagan world. So you get Harut and Marut, get a brief mention, the angels of Babylon, and you mentioned Sirius. But they're few and far between. Mostly the Quran is quite condemnatory towards this sort of thing.
Right. No, I agree.
And then you're saying, well, if it's not in the text of the Quran, where is this stuff coming from, or how is it reaching us? To be more precise, and I suppose you'd say, well, it's coming through the standard narrative. But part of my something I very firmly believe is that the genuine knowledge of the people who wrote the Quran died pretty quickly. There's so much evidence that the people who wrote the standard story of Muhammad hadn't a clue what they were talking about, that this is just guesswork. They're guessing, they're getting things wrong all the time.
Okay.
It seems, I don't think you've got a continuous tradition that goes back from the original Quran composers, authors, and their audience through to the time when people start writing things down 100 years later. I think there's a complete divorce between the two. So I can see that this is all very interesting, and what I can't do at the moment, maybe you'll come round to it, is link this to the Quran, which is, I suppose, my main point of interest.
Well, I'm actually going to be talking ultimately, once I get there, is talking about the Elchasites and talking about this Jewish apocalyptic idea that started in the late 1st, early 2nd century, and look at its parallels with Islam and how this became Manichaeism, and how Manichaeism and Islam, there's so many strong parallels. Also, probably next week, I'll have someone who's an expert who grew up in a Manichaean-like cult, right? You guys have heard of him. I think he's been on with me. He was on last night with us, and so he's actually seen this firsthand, lived it firsthand. He escaped it, and these ideas they still persist. But the things we're looking at, just look at the history, the root, and you'll find so many parallels with Islam. And sure, the Quran condemns these things, but then you have so many chapters of the Quran named after pagan gods and they don't want to admit that these are actual former pagan gods. They deny it, while at the same time they just don't want to let go of these things. You think that they eject them out of the system, but of course they stick around, and they everywhere in the non-Quranic sources, in the secondary sources, which are also considered supposedly revelation. So it's just odd that they somehow fought to include these things subtly, but now they've also got to try and deny them while at the same time not wanting to get rid of them. I just find this a very odd contradiction.
No.
Well, you got a bit of a. I think there might be some links there that need to be strengthened. For start, the chapter names in the Quran, we don't know that those were original, and sometimes they change. So mostly they take the chapter name from a word that occurs prominently, often quite close to the beginning. Not always, but often a word that's close to the beginning. So what you tend to find, probably more of a thing to focus on than the chapter title or the surah title, would be the oaths that you get. Many Qurans surahs start with oaths. So it says, by the fig and the olive, by the pen, and within some of them by the time of day. So you have by the night, by the Layla, and by Duha, what's that, 93, isn't it, in the morning. So within that context, finding the sun and the moon and the stars isn't so strange, because these are oathed by cosmological features, aren't they? You have to say that the morning and the night and so on are also gods.
In a different series I cover that starting about 70 years ago and earlier, from the 50s onwards and even prior, there are strong indications that the Kaaba in that region was very heavily influenced by astrological deities. And in fact, that the Kaaba originally, and there are thousands of such sites all over Arabia, especially standing stones, very much like Stonehenge. But the Kaaba may have been a megalith, like Stonehenge, because there are 50 known sites similar with standing pillars, standing stones in Mecca, and there's thousands of these sites that are built all over Mecca, all over Saudi Arabia, going back 7,000 years. So there was a lot of this astrological worship going on. There was lots of these megaliths.
Are we talking about the Black Stone here?
No, not at all. No, there's lots of new archaeology that's coming up, and there's lots of there's research from 2 centuries ago where people are talking about Islam and things that they knew and things they were finding that are only now coming back to the surface, that have been forgotten. Mm-hmm. And all of these things lead to there being a very strong astrological cult, the Kaaba or whatever. It's like a megalith, and it faces Canopus. It's aligned on Canopus, and it's got huge astrological leanings, just like other megaliths all across Europe, for instance.
Lloyd, if I may, I wanted to respond to Paul's first remark. I fully agree with him about the Quran being a different thing, that the Islamic tradition did not understand the Quran. But there's something even deeper, I think. You see, if you look at the Quran with the eagle eye, you try to get the big picture of things that happen with all the things that happened in the 7th century. The Quran is a sort of collections of proclamations, mm-hmm. and ultimately, these proclamations aimed at converting Arabs and recruiting them in order to conquer Jerusalem. So the Quran is not, I think, a true image of the core beliefs
in Islam
of the early believers. Mm-hmm. You see, when you try to recruit everyone, you try to make friends with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so there might have been some proclamation in the Quran praising pagan beliefs and so on, or odd beliefs that are only there because the preacher wanted his audience to join him. And everyone was welcome, sort of, as long as they abided by a sort of common rules. And the thing with the Quran, it's not a sort of journalist report of what happened. It's a collection that was made decades after the events.
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
was
My focus is not on the Quran, though. I mean, my
after
focus
the
is not
events.
on the Quran. My focus is really on Islam broadly, on stuff, especially within the corpus of Islamic literature and the histories associated with it.
Yeah, but that's the thing with the history of early Islam. We don't know much about it. All we can get is the biggest of pictures, with the conquest of Jerusalem, the rebuilding of the temple, for example, and the coming of Abdul Malik as the God's Caliph. But other than that, it's very hard to distinguish between what was essential for the movement that took Jerusalem and what was not essential.
I agree. I agree with everything that you say, Odin. I think that's absolutely fair. And yeah,
there will always be this sort of fog of war.
No, look, I mean, it's also been deliberately
Islam.
obscured. Right? I think we can agree it's also been deliberately obscured. It's been stripped of of all the detail.
Afterwards, yeah.
I don't know if Odin, if you're hinting about the satanic verses.
It's been edited, redacted.
Which looks as though it might have been an attempt to co-opt blatant pagans into, or unreformed pagans into the Quran's movement.
Yeah, no, I mean, and then, but if you go through the other Quranic sources, if you go through the Encyclopedia of Islam, the references to magic, the references to the occult, which come straight out of the Egyptian mystery religion or the Sabians and so on, it's vast. It's just everywhere. You can't escape it. So this is what's interesting. By the way, there was a guy called the Imperator Knight. This was a comment I took from one of my videos previously. Of course, everyone's a wonderful Christian who makes it up as they go. Two of my sources specifically state that John was a Gnostic. And if you read the Apocryphon of John, you'll see that he directly receives gnosis from Jesus, giving him the power to predict the future. The Apocryphon of John, what the Imperator Knight, this great Christian, didn't seem to know is that it's Gnostic, and it comes not before the gospel, but well after. This is a very late Gnostic book, and we wouldn't regard this as canonical or even historical. It's fiction, it's fan fiction, it's Gnostic fan fiction. Gnostics are not even Christians. So this is the common kind of nonsense that one sees. Okay. So briefly, the word Salam, the root of Islam, can mean graven idol. It does mean graven idol as well, right? In fact, you know what? Mick M says it's a bit like Aleister Crowley with the Egypt stuff, where he borrows it and adapts it to his use. You know what? I have an entire show written on Crowley. I've written an entire series on Crowley. I spent weeks researching and writing on Crowley, about 70 slides, and then my hard drive crashed. I lost it, and I had to start from scratch. I have it; it's mostly done, but I need to do it as well, because Crowley, what is crazy is Crowley, as arch Satanist and so on, who got very much into the Egyptian stuff, he said the Shahada. He became a very devout Sufi. He would recite one of the verses, one of the surahs of the Quran, like 1,000 times a day. And he was very much into Islamic practice, which is very odd. He wasn't into Christianity. He hated that, but he certainly had an affinity for Islam. So, questions, there are oddities on why these Satanists. So, for instance, Jeffrey Epstein, according to the Epstein files, he was sent 3 pieces of the Kaaba for his mosque. So Epstein had a mosque on his island. These are oddities that one has to ask about, has to wonder about. So Strong's Dictionary Hebrew 423, the word Allah, right? From H422, it's a curse, cursing, an execration, an oath, swearing. So the word Allah, in this case, from the Jewish perspective, becomes curse. I know people use the word, Allahu Akbar, mouse, but actually you can find it as curse, right? Just point. And now, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Now, we are told that the Arabic salam is used for salam and Islam. It's a common Semitic word, but it actually also means image, heathen gods. It's referred to in 2 Kings, in Amos and Daniel. And Sulam, the earliest known form, is in the name of Shalim, the ancient god of dusk, of Ugarit or Canaan, right? The Canaanite god. Also Syria. It's also Venus, the evening star, and it's the offspring of El with Atirat. So this is part of the Akkadian Babylonian idea that the god should have a companion, right? Which is why in Islam, God is not a father. God does not have a wife, because from the Babylonian perspective, the god has a companion. So don't forget that I haven't discussed this here, but there was the god Allat, the goddess, shall we say, Allat, right? And Allat was obviously considered the feminine form of Allah. And so Muhammad had to get rid of all that to make Allah stand alone. Allah has no son, Allah has no wife, because he was trying to, now they seem to be explicitly trying to separate Islam from the Babylonian religions, where previously the whole region and Muhammad's family and his whole upbringing was steeped in these practices. In the Akkadian, you have Salmu, which means inscribed or graven image or statue. In Aramaic and Syriac, Salma means image or idol, and it's found in Nabatean, that's Petra, Palmyrene, and Arab Hatra in northern Mesopotamia. Hatra is very interesting because Hatra is an Arab fort city in Iraq. And there was something like 12 of these cities where these Yemeni pagan, these moon-worshipping Arabs would take their goods and move from city to city all the way up into Turkey, and they would come back down, and in each of these cities was a temple that had all of the gods of all of the people that they worked with. So if you think of the Kaaba had 360 idols in it, these temples had all of the gods so that everybody was welcome to worship and buy their goods. I'll pause here for a moment. What are your thoughts, guys?
Lloyd, I don't want to be rude, but I don't think it's very relevant here, because the Hebrew and Aramaic roots, SLM, is a very common thing. It's about peace in a way, but I don't see the link with the graven image. I think it's something completely different here.
No, it legitimately means that. It legitimately means graven image. So, I mean, you can say it means puppy dog. You can say it means shalom, but it also means this. So just like earlier we had, that we were saying that this word, you can read it this way, but you can also read it that way, and there's no reason why you can't read it the other way. They're both perfectly valid.
The reason is that it doesn't make a lot of sense with graven image. It makes a lot of sense with the common Aramaic and Hebrew meaning of the idea of peace, but also the idea of perfection. There is, for example, a translation of Muslim as perfect. Be a Muslim could mean be perfect, be achieved.
Be perfect, even as the Lord is perfect. That could just be a ripping of the Bible.
You find this in the Gospel of Matthew.
Fair enough. However, I mean, scholars are going to go, well, yeah, it's all Abrahamic. Let's all hold hands, hug a tree, sing Kumbaya. However, there are also other things which, once you add them up on this side, you start to see that now you start to draw links to things that are decidedly pagan, things that are decidedly Babylonian, things that are historically rife throughout the region. Right? So, look, I mean, we all know that, for instance, something could mean more than, all Arabic words have more than one meaning. That's not a surprise. Arabic words tend to have easily 3 different meanings. right? So you can
Yeah,
focus
for
on
sure,
one
but,
to the exclusion of others, but there's no reason to ignore those others when you can actually start.
but
So it's easy
the
for
reason
Muslims to
is that
change the. Yeah.
it doesn't make much sense.
It'll make sense. Give it time.
Meaning? What would be the meaning in your thesis? Let's call it
I'm
this
getting
way.
there because I've got
With
like
a graven idol.
I've got like another 100 pages to go. You know, I'm on page 14 and I rushed through the first 12. You know,
of course, would a pagan want to talk about a graven idol? And the phrase seems the sort of phrase that a monotheist might use to talk about, rather dismissively, about a pagan. But a pagan wouldn't think, or a polytheist wouldn't think of their idol as being a graven idol. They would think that this was some totem of their god, wouldn't they?
right?
They wouldn't think of it as being a mere man-made item.
Correct. And if you look, even throughout the Islamic literature, they had the main god was a pagan idol in the Kaaba. There's loads of references to that, right?
If I could come in with a couple of
Sure.
observations, because this theme of the root of the word Islam is I dedicate a couple of pages to it in my great book. The great in terms of size, maybe whether or not in quality, and and to me, one of my great interests is the connection with the word Jerusalem, and whether there is a connection there between the use of
Jerusalem. Yeah.
Yep. And one thing I would point out is you say there are many meanings. A word can have many meanings, and that's certainly true. And it's with the fact that by and large we tend to have the consonants in the Quran and not the vowels. Or at least the vowels are somewhat a matter of guesswork and unreliable tradition. But so one focuses quite a bit on the roots of words, and they can be open to a range of interpretation.
In fact, there's a documentary on Jerusalem which actually says that above the city on the mountain was a temple to the god Shalim, known as the Jeru of Shalim, and that's where the name supposedly comes from originally. The temple of Shalim. That's one theory I've seen.
Yeah. Because I'll get there in a moment. But when one has a word with multiple meanings, of course, what I'd like to know is what was the meaning that the Quran author meant by it. And I think there's some evidence, if one takes a bit of a dive, that the Quran author was using the word Islam or variations upon the SLM root to particularly mean shalom. So, for example, when the Queen of Sheba reads out Solomon's letter, there's a pun on the name, because of course Solomon himself, his name comes from the same root, Shalomo. So I'm just looking for just consulting my notes just for a moment.
Sure.
When I think it's a second Targum of Esther describes the Queen of Sheba getting the letter from Solomon, and it begins with and she opens it and it says, "Peace, this is from Solomon," and there's obviously a pun there, a relationship on between the two words, the word peace and the name of the author, and that is replicated in the Quran. The Quran also has the Queen of Sheba saying, "Here's a letter from Suleiman that says," I have the quote now, that in the second Targum of Esther, the letter begins, "From me, King Shalomo, Shalama," meaning peace to thee and thy princes. And that is a pun that also occurs in the Quran at Surah 27, Al-Naml, and says, "Verily it is Suleimana, and verily it is in the name of God, name of Allah, Al-Rahman, Al-Rahimi, do not exalt yourselves, but come unto me Muslima." So it's got the same kind of thing. And the same thing happens on 3 other occasions where the Quran uses a word from this root in a way that is known from the Jewish tradition. Another quite prominent example, I think, is the blessing given by Jacob on his deathbed, where in the Quran it says, Jacob says, "Oh, my children, Allah has chosen for you the religion, so do not die except Muslima." And that's very similar to a part of the Talmud, the Bereshit Rabbah.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much off topic because I mean it's interesting, but not always necessarily related to where I'm going with this.
Okay, so I was just making the point that for the Quran author, he seems to think more in terms of shalom rather than graven image, I guess.
Right. Yeah, but let's not get too hung up on the Quran itself. Anything from you, JC, before I continue?
Okay, well, I'll be brief. There is an inscription. I think Patricia Caron said that Islam, it doesn't appear in inscriptions until the 8th century. And in the Islamic Awareness website, they show one, I think from the 670s or something like this. And they say, you see, it says Islam. But when you zero in on it, I have zoomed in as much as possible. I cannot see the Aleph of Islam. So it would be SLM only. So when we take that in conjunction with what Paul said before, that there was a break between when they wrote the Quran and when people were interpreting it. We know that they were trying. Christoph Laxenborg has proven that, Munther Yunus, and so on. So it is weird when you take those things into account that the book would be talking about, we have the religion of Islam, like God gave that. God didn't say to Moses, here is the religion of Judaism, or to Jesus, here is the religion of Christianity. So the fact that it is there, it feels like there is more to the story of the word Islam, and we have other examples, like with Tawheed, Muslim says it means oneness, but it actually means unification. So when we take something for granted, we know there is something behind it. So I'm actually very, very curious as to the word Islam, and I'm pretty much convinced that it's not going to end up being the religion of submission. It was something else.
The word Islam, as we have it today, could have been invented 3 weeks ago while they were sitting at a McDonald's and wrote it down on a napkin, Whereas prior to the Quran and whatever, it could have meant something completely different, and there's no reason to think it didn't, right? In pre-Islamic Arabia, the word Silam is an object dedicated to a deity, right? A Silam is an object dedicated to a deity, which is a rock idol, right? And in the feminine form is Silamit, right? In Yemen, you have the singular form, you have the dual form, and the plural form, right? So it could be single, dual, multiple. But there's a feminine form of the Silam. So you have the female god as well, the female goddess, right? Just like Allah and Alat, you have the very same, because they were following the Babylonian pantheon and the Babylonian religion, right? Now, in Jusinia's Hebrew Chaldean lexicon, that's the Hebrew Iraqi lexicon, right? You have a shadow or metaphor of anything that is vain, right? An image, a likeness, right? An idol, an image or idol, mentioned in 2 Kings, in Amos, and in Syria and Chaldea. So that's Syria and Iraq. And in Arabia, it's an image. So even in Arabian, it's also an image in the sense of an idol, okay? Now, Silam is a graven idol. So the word Silam is a common Semitic word and occurs in several languages. And in Akkadian, it means inscribed image, a large or a small statue. In Hebrew, it means an image or likeness. In the Biblo-Aramaic, it means an image. The Syriac Salma means an image idol. In epigraphic texts, it's used in Old and Official Aramaic, Nabatean, Palmyrene, Hatran, and Old Syriac inscriptions. And the masculine indicates an image of a god or a man. And there's a feminine form as well with the marker T, right? Allah, Alat, right? So Islam, Islamat, right? In Old Aramaic, the word occurs twice in the Aramaic text of the Assyrian Aramaic bilingual, right? And the bilingual is carved on a life-sized human statue found accidentally in 1979 in northeast Syria, right? And the king offers the statue to his god, Hadad of Sikan. And then the statue, Silim, is statue, image, or dimit. Dimit, if you go to East Africa again, you go to the Aksumite kingdom. This was one of the tribes, one of the famous tribes, the pagan Babylonian moon worshipping tribes who were influenced by the Yemenis who'd invaded and controlled that region. Then you have the Dimit as well, tribes called the Dimit, and of course that's a likeness, an image, an idol. You shall not make an image in my likeness, right? In other words, graven idols. And in Nabatean inscriptions, the word for statue is Silim as well. Now we can just discard all of this and say, no, it just means peace, it just means submission, let's move on. Or we can say, hey, there's a story here that we might want to look at.
What story then?
That the word Salem for Islam, there's a lot going on here. This word is doing a lot of heavy lifting that has to do with pagan graven idols going back in history, and maybe Muslims put a spin in it back in 1931, who knows, or 1924 when they printed the first canonical Quran, but 5 minutes before that it meant something completely different. So yeah, and these are Silims. These are 9,000-year-old Silims found in the Jordan. Okay, this is in the Jordanian desert. These are 9,000. These are graven idols. You can see pillar idols with faces carved on them. Pillar idols. This one has a carving there. So these are multiple, but these are 9,000-year-old pillar idols found in the Jordan. And there are sites like this or similar all over Saudi Arabia, just by the way, as I was mentioning. Yeah. So this practice is rife within the region. Yes, Odon?
No, I was just saying they look nice. I rather like them, particularly the fellas up on the top right.
Yeah, they seem happy.
Yeah. It looks like emojis, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely the
friendly face.
Yeah, it's definitely. Let's have a look here. Yeah, it's like the emoji guy. Yeah, he's not so happy. He's been a bit damaged there, but yeah, just so. Oops, where was I? Bugger. Here we go. Let's continue. So the Sabians and the Sabaeans. Hadiths link Muhammad with the Sabians. We'll go for like another 10 minutes or so. A religious culture identified with the Chaldeans, Iraqis. Think Iraq. Scholars recognize the Sabians as a historical group connected to Mesopotamian religious group linked to Haranian star-worshipping pagan or Gnostic traditions. They practiced a blend of Hellenistic, Babylonian, and ancient Semitic beliefs. So now you've got a group from that region close to the Persian border in Iraq, and they filled it sort of, you can say it was in that region. Now you've got, again, back to the Hellenistic, Babylonian, and ancient Jewish beliefs, right? There were historical connections between the Sabaeans and the development of Mohammedanism, an early term for Islam. And in fact, even the name for Islam changed. It was Hanifan, Mohammedanism. They were the Al-Mu'minin. They were different. So the word Islam is a fairly late usage as well. Correct, Odon? The word Islam is not the first name for that group. They were called a bunch of different things. The Hagarenes, there were a whole bunch of names for them.
Yeah, of course. But it's also common knowledge that Islam and Muslim were used, I think, maybe starting with Abdul Malik.
Yeah.
Before this, they had another meaning within the Quran. I think a meaning connected to not to graven idols, but to something else.
No, look, I mean, today they'll say, yeah, it means, I mean, look, think about it now. Now they're trying to normalize pedophilia, right? Yeah. And then pretty soon it's going to know what it actually means is, it actually means something else, because that's what they do. They've been doing it from the beginning.
That's what they do, exactly. They have core beliefs on this text, but it keeps on evolving, on changing. It's like the Kaaba. It's always being rebuilt.
Yeah.
I think that when Abdul Malik, in the time of the Umayyads up till, well, I wouldn't say up to Abdul Malik, but let's say around the time of Abdul Malik, whenever they were building those great works on the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, and the Dome of the Chain, which is very interesting. These are definitely monotheistic structures. They're obviously rooted in a biblical worldview. You wouldn't build it there. The very site is quite charged with meaning. So the people who built that, and not just Abdul Malik, but presumably all the people who he was building it for to impress, they would have had a more or less biblically informed worldview. He wouldn't have seen it as Islam in the way that we now think of it as Islam. Abdul Malik wouldn't have cared two hoots about Mecca or anything down in the Hijaz. That wasn't his interest. And that came about much, somewhat later, wouldn't it?
Interesting point. Yeah, I mean, look, the Islamic capital moved to Syria. I mean, what's it doing in Syria and then to Baghdad? You're like, huh? I thought Jerusalem didn't suddenly move to Greenland and then to Paris.
No. The very interesting issue here is why Damascus and why Syria? Who were the Umayyads? Why did they choose Syria? And
when we say Syria, I think there's a place I can't. It begins with the J. I'm not quite sure. Do you remember the name?
Jeddah. Are you not thinking of Jeddah? No,
I don't think so. I think I've got, and it's very close to Damascus. But
I've been there. I know it. I know. I think I've actually been to the site. I know what you mean. I've actually visited there, but I can't think of the name offhand right now.
Oh, well, I'm not. The place I'm thinking of is where the Ghassanids used to have their. They didn't quite have a capital. The Lakhmids had Hira. The Ghassanids never really had a capital. But if they had a central location, it would be this place that was very close to Damascus. So I wonder if that was just a natural place for the Arabs to gravitate towards, because basically they were Ghassanids by a different name.
Yeah. I actually went to one of their palaces just across the border of Syria in Jordan, I think it was. Yeah, and yeah, but it's odd that they weren't in Mecca for sure.
Yeah, there was no Mecca at the time. But the point I wanted to make, it's a remark a scholar friend told me. He told me that the Umayyads, they chose the church of John the Baptist as their stronghold in Damascus, especially this. And he thought that they might have had a sort of devotion to John the Baptist, and so there might have been a connection with the Sabaeans, who were Baptists. And he said that it might be that Sabaeans might have come from the various currents of John the Baptist.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, we'll get deeper into all of this at the moment.
And just for the anecdote, another thing, in the Islamic tradition, there is this very strange anecdote about Muhammad. When Umar ibn al-Khattab said the Shahada and supposedly converted to Islam, then Muhammad baptized him. He poured water on his head.
Good grief. That is bizarre.
Yeah, it can also show a connection with the Sabaean movement.
Right. I mean, they were baptizers. They were known as they did ablutions. I need to look. Yeah. Look, at the moment, I'm putting together a lot of, shall we say, pieces on the board. Things that were in the region, in the history, that are known within the history and the Islamic literature. Right, trying to tie parallels, and then I'll dig straight into the Sabaeans, not the Sabaeans, the Elchasites. But at the moment, I'm just trying to lay it out. This is a different view of Islam, right, from its history. Most of us, remember, J. Smith history started in 570, and there was nothing before it, and everything happened in the north. And that's been the prevailing view for a while now. I'm trying to go, what happened in 569 and before, and were there any other locations involved? Now, Al-Hira, near Najaf, right, Iraq, the capital of the Lakhmids, the major Arab client kingdom of the Sasanian Empire, that's important, that's the Persians, right, in pre-Islamic times, was the center of the Church of the East. So now you've got the Nestorian Church in Mesopotamia, which were there until the 11th century, and the Muslims eventually shut them down, right? It declined and it became overshadowed by Kufa in Iraq. Now, where was the major centers of learning in Iraq? Well, in Kufa, right? J. Smith always talks about Kufa, right? And what was down the road from Kufa? The major Jewish centers of learning, the major Jewish yeshivas, right? So now you've got a mixture between the Jewish, the Muslim, as well as the Persian, as well as the Nestorian churches, all mixed together in this region, in Al-Hira, right? Najaf, which is very close to Kufa, right, in Iraq.
Which is also a very Shia, a stronghold for the Shiites.
Right.
For the Shia movement.
Yeah, Bain Best is the Sabian Manians have Rishama, daily baptism. Yeah, we'll get into the Sabians. Yeah, we'll definitely dig a little bit more. So it became overshadowed. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, very, very enthusiastic about Hira. My blood pressure rises. My interest gets much heightened when you start talking about Hira, because there's an awful lot going on there. Apart from anything else, it is reputedly where Arabic was first written down, where they developed the language.
Correct.
Arabic.
You know what's interesting? There was a slightly off topic, but Paul, we need to talk about this more. I mean, put some notes together, and we can end up talking about some of these. I think there's a lot to be learned and investigated here, right? Mm-hmm. I think we can start to look at the standard narrative and say, hold on, maybe we can interpret this differently or explore new ideas. But don't forget the Quran. The vowelization of the Quran, the pronunciation of the Quran was fixed in Iraq, right? You go to Kufa, that's when they started the whole stream where they started to create the standardized Quran back then, at least in the 6th, 7th century. But few people realize at the very same time, the Jews living in Iraq, basically on the same street, right, just down the street across the road at their little yeshiva, they were also then standardizing the Hebrew language, and they were also then creating the standardized written vowelization of the Hebrew language and creating, shall we say, a more standardized Old Testament, the Masoretic, right? And so the Quran and the Masoretic text were basically established at roughly the same time in parallel as sister projects under Muslim rule, which is really interesting. And there's another story to be thought of there. But I mean, that's not relevant here right now, but it's just something that I've been looking at. And it's a little fishy because then when the Masoretic started to write the Old Testament, they started to strip out, shall we say, the references to the Messiah. They started to alter from the Old Septuagint to the Masoretic. And this is something where, of course, where lots of Protestants are going to go, no, going to lose their little minds. But unfortunately, they started to edit the Old Testament to strip out Messianic references. Under the Muslims, by the way, you know. So,
and are you going to mention the cave, or am I leaping ahead?
No. Do you want to add something? Go ahead. No, please.
I'll mention the cave. Well, because Al-Hira is the name given to the cave, isn't it? Where Muhammad supposedly had his first revelation in the cave of Hira. And rather like we were talking a couple of weeks ago about Safa and Marwa, and you wonder why anyone would have given these rocks names until they needed to explain somebody running between Safa and Marwa. You don't just go around the desert just giving rocks names for no reason that don't mean anything. Similarly with the cave, why was the cave called Hira? You don't normally give caves names. Maybe some do, but
so we got revelation in Hira, where the Arabic language was standardized and the Quran was written in a standardized Arabic language. Isn't that fascinating?
Well, the Quran's very proud of the fact that it's in such good Arabic. It mentions it frequently.
That was created in Iraq, in Hira. Isn't that fascinating? And eventually,
Hira was also a sort of starting point for Islam, sort of for very, very early Islam. You see, the Persian Empire managed to get almost all Arabs under its control by having the king of the Lahmids, who reigned in Al-Hira, in its payroll. this king was baptized something like in 692 or 694. I don't remember exactly. But he had such an influence on all Arabs that the Persians had him killed in 602. And it started a revolt of all Arabs from Al-Hira, expanding to all Arabs. And some of these Arabs left the Persian army and went in the desert of Arabia and elsewhere. And there, something started to brew. And Islam came out of this many years ago. Not Islam, but the Arab factions, for example, like the one who took Jerusalem. So you see, Al-Hira was very, very important for the history of early Islam.
I agree. I mean, Bain Best says this matches the thesis that Islam came from the north, not from the Hejaz, and that's true. But this doesn't mean we can also discard it might have been documented maybe up north, but it doesn't mean that but they also decided to transplant it into Mecca. So that means they had to somehow fit it into a culture that already had all of these traditions. They had to somehow make it fit Abrahamic, Jewish, Christian / all of this weird Abrahamic stuff. But yeah, I mean, anything from you, JC?
I think Odin, you were mentioning the Shia before.
Yeah.
But in one of the chronicles, one of the Christian chronicles of the age, it referred to Ali as Emir of Hira.
Yeah,
it's the only chronicle that, the only evidence of any sort that Ali actually held any official title, and he called himself Emir of Hira. So that seems to have been his base back in the day.
Yeah. Thanks to this, we could see early Islam grossly as being a movement of different Arab factions. The Mesopotamian Christian Arabs from Al-Hira and other Christian Arabs, maybe Hassanids, and what one could understand the struggle between the factions as pertaining to their different origins.
Yeah, I mean, look, the whole area, Syria, Iraq, might have been too congested, and they said, well, bugger this, let's go somewhere and start clean.
Yeah, also.
So, but also, thank you very much to Phil. He says, is anything in Islam original? Anything at all? Looks like killing dogs is original in Islam. I think we've kind of nailed that one down.
And marrying also, 6 years old also.
Yeah, diddling kids. That's also, sadly. And I want to say thank you to Harry as well for your donation earlier. Thank you very, very much. Really, I mean, seriously, it goes a long way. I do appreciate it. Just so you guys know, it's not really a concern for you, but YouTube heavily throttles me. I make roughly a third to a quarter of what I used to make on YouTube a year ago. So seriously, YouTube seriously is hammering my channel. So yeah, I mean, it's not like I made a fortune to begin with. I don't drive a Lamborghini. So, but yeah, YouTube is not exactly making me rich. Let's put it that way. Okay, so JC, did you want to add anything before I finish the slide?
No, thank you. I'm good. The whole thing about Al-Hira and everything like that goes a little bit above my pay grade, so I'm good.
Yeah. Well, so the ancient South Arabian Sabaean kingdom of Saba or Sheba, that's Yemen, was a prosperous civilization. In fact, you could say it was regarded as maybe the third most powerful empire of its day, right? Third or fourth most powerful empire. And its decline, specifically the collapse of the Marib Dam, which is mentioned in the Quran, led to the migration of the Arab tribes, or shall we say, the South Arabian tribes, northwards. And they spread their culture. Remember, they were Babylonian moon worshippers, just under their names, their language. And they influenced the region's religious landscape before the rise of Islam. Now, a couple of things. The Sabians and the Sabaean beliefs, couple of differences. You had the Sabians, or the Al-Sabiyun, right? They identified with the Chaldeans. Now, that takes us back to Hira, Syria, Turkey as well, okay? A blend of beliefs from the Persians, the Greeks, the Egyptians. They lacked a systematic theology, right? And this most closely matches the Iranian Sabians, and this is where Abraham came from, and Muslims want to return to the religion of Abraham. Abraham goes to Haran, which still exists today, right? They were the star worshippers of the city of Haran, and sometimes the Mandeans, the baptizing Gnostics of Mesopotamia. So there's a matching with the Mandeans, not necessarily 100% overlap. The description of a syncretic blend without systematic theology is often applied to the Iranians who adopted the Sabian title, the people of the book, to gain protection as people of the book under Islamic rule. That's the Sabians. Now the Sabaeans, and the Quran kind of mixes between the two without clarity a lot of the time. The Quran tends to lean, from my analysis, tends to lean towards the Sabians, but it doesn't always make a clear distinction between the Sabaeans and the Sabians. But Muhammad was a Sabian, Muhammad was a Sabi, and Muslims who converted called themselves Sabians, right? According to the Hadiths and the traditions. Now, it seems to want to downplay the Sabaeans, but this is al-Sabah, the Yemenis, connected with practices shared with the Chaldeans. They were Babylonians, right? Also the Nabateans, they shared deities with the Nabateans and other nations, and they had shared religious doctrines and practices. And this is the ancient kingdom of Saba in Yemen or South Arabia, and they primarily worshipped the moon god Al-Makka, also known as Allah. And this is long before Islam. He was called Allah. In fact, you can go back, you can find them 1000 BC. Their inclusion in the list emphasizes that the Quranic term Al-Sabiyun was often confused with or distinct from these Arabian Sabaeans. So the Quran deliberately mixes the two. Ave Maria is Chaldean, just so by the way. Chaldeans are Catholic.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So she's from Chaldea. Right. Now, the Sabians have a blend of beliefs identified with the Chaldeans, a mixture from Persians, Greeks, and Egyptians. They had no developed systematic theology. 17th century scholars treated Sabians as historically present and tied to Chaldean paganism. Right? So we can go back and find the scholarship going back 400 years on this. Right? They were viewed as composite borrowing across multiple cultures without a coherent system. Sounds a bit like Islam. And they had a mixture and a lack of a system associated with Iraq. Sounds again a bit like Islam. The Sabaeans shared doctrines and practices with the Iraqis, with the Babylonians, with the Nabateans. So now you've got those mixtures, right? They had more specific doctrines and rituals, but this was a widespread religion. This was the Babylonian religion, which was widespread in the region. Okay, and of course they had, so I'll leave it at that. That's enough. Now, I'll leave this at this for the moment, and I also want to mention one more thing. I'll do this, but your thoughts, guys, before I continue.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, but those are definitions of ancient Sabaeans.
Mm-hmm.
Because as the comment said, Chaldeans were Christianized, and they were Christianized very early. And they are one of the most they are very true to their Christian beliefs. They have kept the Aramaic language, for example.
Yeah.
And so I think they used to be pagans with what you say there, the blend of beliefs and so on. But there's also there might be a chance that the Sabaeans or some of the Sabaeans that are referred to in the Qurans are actually Christians.
Look, no doubt, the Quran's a mess.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it's a mess. But since they are identified with people of the scriptures, Nazarenes and so on, it might be because they were Aramaic-speaking sort of Orthodox Christians.
No, look, the Quran, obviously, look, I mean, we know, having read the Quran with Usama, done 50-something episodes on the Quran alone, the Quran strips out a lot of identifying detail. It's so vague. It's frustrating. You know, so, obviously they made it so that you can't prove them wrong and they can say it, well, it actually meant this, because it's so vague. There's nothing specific. But it's just that the culture And think about it. Paganism is on the rise again today. Like in Europe, a lot of pagan. It's not like because it was Christianized, paganism vanished off the face of the earth and we don't have a single trace of it. No, people are doing it today. So the influences exist still, and from a cultural memory or someone who still practiced it. So it's not like it's totally disappeared and people aren't influenced by it. It's just that I'm trying to paint a picture of the culture and the history and the influences from which Islam came, be it the Hijaz, be it Africa, be it Syria, be it all of these regions, all of these presences within. Islam is present somehow in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. JC, your thoughts, Paul?
Yeah, it feels almost like herding cats. Like there are all these moving pieces, they copied from lots of different places. Let's just be honest. If this was about Abrahamic faith, the Quran would now sit on top of the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they would have a story that follows through from there. And all of the traditions you would actually be able to trace back. But that's not the case. They're doing things that have never been seen in the Abrahamic faith, so they have taken from places. And when you are showing these sort of things, like the Sabians were doing all of these things, and we find them in Islam, like the ones that you showed, that they had some laws that now they are in Sharia, and it's like, come on, where did they take that from? They took it from those guys. So you're starting to paint a picture, and it's starting to make sense. They didn't copy those things from Christians and Jews, but they copied them from other people, and you're making a very good case for where some of these things came from.
Thanks. Yeah, Paul, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's very mysterious, and the Sabiun don't get that much of a reference in the Quran, do they? They get mentioned 3 times, and it's kind of in passing. They don't tell us anything about them. It's just, oh, these people, they may get their reward too, but they don't say who they are or any clues. Yeah, I mean, we don't know if they're Sabians or Sabaeans or something else. It's I regard it as a known unknown.
I agree. It's hard to be definitive. It's very hard. I'm just saying
on the people from Haran, of course, there is a possibility. I think Gabriel Said Reynolds talks about this. There's a possibility that these people just made it up because they didn't want to get slaughtered. I think I can tell where you're going with the Elias of the Traveller. They wanted to be people of the book, and they might have adopted the Sabiun and the ambiguity and said, that's us. You can't.
True. But there are other references. There's another reference I'm doing in a different series, which I did yesterday with another group that was actually using a book that seems to potentially have been the Injil, but it was another apocryphal book, and these people followed it, and it could be that this is potentially the Injil, and it's a very Old Testament leaning apocryphal book. So there's so much about this that it's very hard to be clear. But I just want to mention the last thing, because I've caught up now with this, and now I can start with I can start fresh on my next topic next week, clean. But the Sharia tells us that Islam is Gnostic. It's explicit, right? There are multiple references. They speak of the spiritual stations of annihilation, of Gnostic vision. Stopping at the first traces of gnosis is bad. Keep going, right? It says here that others, like other people have claimed to attain to gnosis, but they're not like us Muslims. We Muslims, we've really attained to the gnosis. We've found the truth. We found the gnosis. We have reached nearness to Allah. Everyone else is just faking it, right? And then, of course, we have attained to gnosis. Not those other guys that claim to be Gnostics. No, we're the true Gnostics. We're the If you go on YouTube and you watch imams, senior imams, we're talking highly qualified guys, they will openly boast about Islam being Gnostic, and they will teach you all of the Islamic Gnosticism. It's crazy. The Gnostic...
Asim al-Hakim, if you watch him, you will see that he is so full of gnosis.
Yeah, they're nonsense. Yeah. And we have reached the level of those to whom the unseen, we believe in one Lord, the Father, the Almighty, the creator of heaven and earth, maker of the seen and unseen, Well, they have attained to the unseen, right? They can see what is unseen, what is hidden by God. That's what that means. So we are the ones to whom the unseen is disclosed. We have Gnostic insight. We can see what God has hidden. That's the implication here. So understand there's also this Gnostic implication within the Sharia, which is the law of Islam. That's my last slide, because next week I will go to cover Gnosticism. I need to speak about Gnosticism. Some of the sources of Islam. We have to look at the sources of Islam, in this case, Gnosticism. Because we've covered some pagan stuff, then we'll look at the Gnostic layer a little closer next time. Your thoughts, Odon? You were laughing there for a moment. I saw you laughing.
No, please. No, it's all about the secret sauce.
It is the secret sauce.
Secret ingredient.
With the secret ingredients, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you agree that these sources exist? At least they seem to be associated somehow with Islam. Because I'll be going into more of these as we go forward.
Yeah, it looks like the next episode is going to be spicy.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it from me. I think I can wrap up here, and we'll talk about some of the sources of Islam next week. We're looking at, hopefully this has made sense. Hopefully the audience, you've learned something, you found some benefit. Thank you for those who donated. It is greatly appreciated. Odon, what do we have here? We have someone who sent us. JC, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to join a couple of the things that have been discussed kind of like together. So you were talking about like the word Islam. When we take something for granted in Islam, we are already deceived. The whole thing has been 1400 years of nonsense. And Lloyd, you said they keep changing the goalpost. Yes, they do. This is a very clear example. Let me see if I can make it just a little bit bigger. One sec. So this is simply a verse in the Quran. So Yusuf Ali, who is the oldest of all of these people, look at this, the baptism of Allah. And who can baptize better than Allah? Odon was mentioning even that case of Muhammad baptizing Abu Bakr or Umar or whoever it was. But look how that changes. By the time that we get to Sahih International, it's not
Daif
baptism, it's
International,
religion.
sorry, Daif International.
Daif International, that changes, which is very recent and the standard now, to their religion. Hang on a minute. And others, they use the other interpretation of the word, which is the coloring. What are you talking about the coloring of God? So we can see they are moving the goalpost now in the 21st century. They see something that is not convenient, like putting the word baptism because it's haram, it's not good in Islam. So you can see how even using translators, they will do these sort of things. So it is happening. And now, well,
and if
Lloyd,
we argue today, but Lloyd, it means coloring.
Yeah.
You go like, but 5 minutes ago it meant something completely different.
Yeah, and it's 1400 years of this. So what we're seeing here is a snippet, is one case. So if you try to extrapolate that to 1400 years, I am just not surprised at all that you are showing all of these things, all of these influences where they copied, they change, tafsirs being created, hadiths, interpretations, and the whole nonsense. So there you have it in black and white.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Yeah, so guys, we should end up here. So the idea of gnosis is seeing in the spirit world. That's the third. Yeah, no, so that's what was offered by the serpent in the garden.
Yeah, sort of. But that's the thing. When we talk about Gnosticism, your whole presentation is not so much about the spiritual content of the movements, but it's more on their genealogy,
the historical context.
Yeah, the context and so on. You could also look at Gnosticism as spiritualisms. What is at play within the religion, the Gnostic religion? Mm-hmm. What do they believe actually, and what does it work? What does it do to the believers? Are they redeemed, for example? Do they get salvation? What is their idea of salvation? That's that's what's at play within these movements. It's not only about borrowing from ancient religions and so on. It's also a practice.
Yeah, but you know, so when I lived, coming from Africa, I can tell you there are ways that Africans think that Westerners just don't understand. There are ways that third worlders think that Westerners cannot comprehend. You can't understand because you don't think that way. It's not rational for you to do that. And so sometimes I probably see the world in a way that is very hard for Westerners, educated Westerners, to see, because it's just not natural to see the world in that kind of way. And for me, it's perfectly normal. You know.
No.
So, yeah, Paul, any final words before I go on?
No, thank you very much. It's been a fascinating, thought-provoking presentation.
Yeah, it'll get a little
I'm
more.
afraid I don't have much to offer on the. I don't have too much to offer on the Sabaeans and so on, but I'm learning a lot. Thank you.
No, it's always good to have different perspectives, and next week it'll get more, I guess, focused. But I was trying to put a lot of pieces on the board, you know, and hopefully tie these threads together going forward. I'm saying, look, let's look at all of these things. It's odd that we keep running across these. Yeah, so that's it, guys. Thank you very much. Really do appreciate your time. Thank you very much for the contribution. Thanks to the audience. Really great to have you guys with us. And we'll see you guys next week. Take care, everyone. God bless.
Thank you, Lloyd.